to the hybrid meeting of the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is able to be viewed live by members of the press and public today. Therefore, may I welcome anyone that may be watching remotely. A recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's webcasting and YouTube channels after the meeting has concluded, should anyone else wish to view it. To confirm, as a Council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I have not received any notification or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind members to refrain from using the chat facility and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you wish to speak. Please could you also keep your microphone muted when not talking, so there aren't any interruptions encountered. May I also remind members that as per the statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending a meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask you that you all please use your cameras for the duration of the meeting. Moving on to the agenda, could Jade, our Democratic Services Officer, confirm if we have received any apologies, please?
Thanks, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Councillor Lucy Williams, thank you. Declarations of interest. Could I ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any declarations of interest? I think every school is mentioned in this report today, so we need declarations if you're on governing bodies or have any relatives. Councillor Best is not online at the moment. Councillor Cowles?
Governor at Aberystwyth School, and I have a brother at Aberystwyth School, and Governor at Blenavon Heritage VC Primary School as well.
Thank you. Victoria Haller?
Parent Governor at Yscol Panteg, and I have children at Yscol Panteg.
Thank you. Councillor Jones, Janet Jones?
I'm Governor at Blenavon Heritage School, and I have a grandson who's a pupil there.
Thank you. Councillor Price?
Chair, I have a granddaughter in Gwynthlew. Thank
you. Myself, I'm a member of the Crew Management Board. I've got grandchildren and great-grandchildren at Yscol, at YGG, Blenheim Road School and Nursery, and Coediva, and I'm also a trustee on the Torfaen Leisure Trust. Sorry about that long list, just a moment. Yeah, Councillor Watkins. Oh, sorry, Councillor Thomas.
I'm Governor at Nant Cairn School and I had a grandchild at Cwmbran High.
And Councillor Watkins.
Thank you. I'm Governor at Our Lady of the Angels Primary School and Cwmbran High School.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thanks. I'm a LEA Governor at St David's Roman Catholic Primary School.
Thank you. Takes us to agenda item 3. Any other apologies other than we've taken? I don't think there's that. Okay, minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of March 2024. Just to remind members, these minutes relate to the report we received on the EAS business plan, progress update and progress against ESTIN recommendation 1. Please could I ask members to confirm that the minutes are an accurate account of the meeting, and if anyone is for, against or abstaining. All those in agreeing with the minutes? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Those minutes are carried. Thank you. That takes us to agenda item 4, the action sheet. Please could members confirm if they have any questions and whether they are happy to note the action sheet. Happy to note, thank you. Agenda item 5, which is the main agenda item for this morning, which is Sustainable Communities for Learning 21st Century Schools. The purpose of the report is to explain how the emerging priorities plan for ongoing investment in Torfaen school assets beyond 2024 and will deliver on the objectives of the Sustainable Communities for Learning programme, which is the new name that the Welsh Government have put on the project. May I welcome Councillor Richard Clark, the Executive Member for Children and Families and Education, Andrew Powles, the Director of Education, John Tushingham, Head of Resources and Planning, and Steve Tong, I'm not sure of your designation.
Head of Access and Engagement.
Welcome. May I take this opportunity to ask officers for their brief report, please. I missed something here. Hang on. May I take this opportunity to thank members of the public for their comments regarding the report, which we appreciated by all members of the committee when we were formulating our questions for today's meeting. On behalf of the committee, may I also thank Mrs Natalie Richards and her colleagues at Crossy School for our very informative visit earlier this week, which has proved very useful in preparing for today's meeting. Now, can I ask officers if they could provide members with a brief overview of the main points in the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Long-term capital strategy. So something that started back in 2009 as a national programme, and one that Torvine developed its proposals for with members, approved by Council 2010. And since 2010, we've been steadily working through a wide range of proposals designed to deliver 21st century facilities for children and young people across the borough. A big task, an expensive task, and hence long-term strategy. I think it's probably helpful if I just break it down into three bits. The primary focus back in sort of the mid-teens of the 20s was around dealing with surplus places, of which we had in excess of 20%. Lots of difficult decisions made by the council to remove some schools, make sure that the remaining schools were in the right place. And to some extent, the fact that we did that released some sites to give us money to invest in other facilities. So within the report that you've got in front of you, we talk about some of the work that we did at that time, but it was characterised by dealing with surplus places predominantly. And introducing some new facilities. So, for example, the 3 primary schools, Usgo Panteg, Llantarnam, and Blenheim. We also, in that period, started to deal with the issues around post-16 and the fact that there wasn't sustainable provision of post-16 in the borough. We took advantage of an opportunity to remove the school-based sixth forms and work in collaboration with Colleague Gwents to create the learning zone in Cwmbran. In Band B, we started to move into a part of the programme which was more about making sure that we added provision where we needed to add it, and also deal with some of the condition issues in a couple of primary schools. So you'll be familiar, I hope, with the proposals that are now visible at the Maindy site, because work started in the last month or so. And for members' information, that expansion of that school, and the fact it's going to be brand new school, but the expansion bit was predominantly because of the South Sebastopol development that was agreed nearby, and making sure that we had enough places there for future demand. But also it covers all sorts of provisions on that site. We've got a base, we've got Flying Start coming on stream there as well. So a really important development, one we're really pleased to have going. The other significant capacity issue was around Cranbridge, and the fact that we nationally there's been an increase in the need for specialist places. We're no different. We recognise that, and we're nearly doubling the size of Cambridge. That work is well underway. Again, if you've been into that part of Cwmbran, you'll see that the shell of the building is now in place. In fact, I think it's nearly watertight, so they'll be moving on to the internal stuff quite shortly, and should be ready for occupation later this year. We did have 2 other projects in Band B, which were to do some refurbishments of Usgo Brynhaven and Usgo Gymraeg Cwmbran. They were temporarily suspended, and that was a function of the escalating costs that again, we saw nationally, but we felt locally, following the COVID period in particular. Just to give you an example of that, schemes have been going up by 50 to 100%. And when you're talking about millions, it rapidly gets to the point where affordability is a key consideration. So we suspended those temporarily, and we'll talk a little bit about what we want to do with those next. Welsh Government has changed the approach slightly now. So we had Band A, we had Band B. The banding system has been discontinued, and they're introducing a rolling programme, which in effect means that councils are not tied to each other in the way that projects are brought forward, which is an unintended consequence of the previous banding system. You put your bids in at the start, and then you were pretty much, you had to wait for everybody else to get to the finish line, and then you put new bids in. The rolling programme gives a little bit more flexibility, and it means that Welsh Government's got more flexibility, as I understand it, to move money around at a national level. So a 9-year rolling programme. We are at the stage at the moment where we have identified what we think our priorities need to be, and part of the process of finalising those is coming here today. So thank you for that opportunity. But also we will need to go to Cabinet at some point just to get them ratified. It's largely conditioned now that we're dealing with. We're not expecting growth unless there's new housing. And new housing, we would expect developers to contribute to the cost of the additional demand. So it is largely about condition. There is some growth that we know we need to plan for around Welsh medium education. We have our targets for growth, again, like all the councils in Wales. So we know that by the end of this decade, we're going to have to be putting more provision in place. But we need to do it in a measured way. We know that we probably need to do some work around the pupil referral unit, but at a primary level rather than a secondary level, which it is now. And that's just to reflect the complex behavioural issues that, again, have grown across the country and have probably been exacerbated as a result of COVID. And you know, the number of cases has been going up, but the complexity of some of the cases has been growing as well. And I think earlier in the year you had a paper around some of those issues. So just into the headline terms, we think that we need to try to get to the point of being able to finish off the 2 Welsh medium primary school refurbishments. They were designed, we got to the point of costing, and that's the point at which we needed to divert funding to make sure that we could deliver mainly in Cranbridge. But we think we need to try and get those back on track. We will be doing new provision or refurbishment at 7 other sites. We'll be looking at the Welsh medium, we'll be looking at the pupil referral unit, and we've got an ongoing dialogue with the Archdiocese, Roman Catholic Archdiocese, about its estate, in particular at the moment about St Albans, but we'd like them to come to us with their views on the rest of their estate as well, in the fullness of time. The issue is around funding. This is an expensive business, and you know, I think we've been really lucky as a team. We've been really lucky because members have actually given a large proportion, the largest proportion of the capital that's been available over the last 7-8 years, if not more, to education, so that we could actually deliver this plan. There are other things that the council wants to do. So we know we're not the only ones that are asking for money. And the situation at the moment is we are trying to finalise funding certainly for the 2 primary school refurbishments, try and get those on track, and then we can work on the longer term stuff. I think that gives a summary really of where we're at the moment. It's worth focusing on the implications if you want to refer to paragraph 6 in the report. We're talking about a further investment of around £140 million, so a large sum of money at a time when the budgets are getting stretched year on year. Some of the issues that we need to resolve, I've referenced the conversations with the Archdiocese. They need to continue. We need to understand what capital they're going to bring to the programme, and that will help us to plan and help us to work with them, because in the past we've worked very much hand in glove with them to look at different proposals that could be brought forward, and that offer is still on the table, that we will work with them on that. We are very heavily involved in the discussions around the revised local development plan. I said before about new housing comes along, that likely leads to an increase in demand for places. We need to make sure that we understand what that increased demand is going to be, to develop plans that ensure we'll be able to meet the demand, and as I said, try to recover the costs from the developers as a part of the process. So we're heavily involved in that process. And to some extent, there is flex in the proposals that are at Appendix 1, because we don't yet know what that plan is going to deliver. We have a good idea of where the housing growth is going to be, but we can't say for sure that it will make it through to the final plan. And funding, it remains the issue. We're involved with conversations with the Archdiocese around the Roman Catholic schools. We're involved with conversations with Welsh Government around their contributions. And obviously there are conversations continuing within the Council around medium-term financial planning, long-term financial planning in this case, because of the sums involved in the period that's probably going to be required. And I think, Chair, I'll leave the summary there and we just go into questions if that's okay.
Thank you very much, John. You had nearly came in to answer all our questions as well. May I invite members to ask the questions as per the order agreed during the pre-agenda yesterday. Thank you very much. Janet Jones, I think you've got the first question. Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I've admitted to say that I had a niece at Ysgol Brynolyn, so I do apologise. My question is related to paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2 of the report. What was the level of funding provided by Torfaen Council and Welsh Government for bands A and B investments? And would you anticipate the same split of funding for any future investments under the Sustainable Communities for Learning programme?
So it fell into different categories. Band A, it was 75% Welsh Government, 25% Torfaen Council. And Band B, they changed their contribution to 65% and 35% for the council. So those are mainstream. For example, Crown Bridge and Band B, that receives 75% Welsh Government, 25% council money. So they're slightly different groupings. We haven't delivered a faith-based VA project yet, but they've got different bandings as well. They'd be 85% Welsh Government, 15% Archdiocese.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Next question refers to 3.5. Looking at the 4 investment objectives, there was a criteria and the process for re-evaluating the banding priorities and changing the council agreed previous decisions. And how will the priorities be determined? Did I ask that right then? What was the criteria for the process for re-evaluating the banding priorities and changing the council agreed previous decisions? And how will the priorities be determined going forward in 24-25? For example, Cumbrae High was moved down the order of priority, as was the 2 schools that we haven't managed to do in Band B. Thanks.
We last did a review of priorities in 2017, which we took to Cabinet at the time. Largely speaking, the priorities at that time hadn't changed. What's different this time is the condition of some of our schools, and particularly the condition of our secondary schools. So typically, if you looked at the programme that was put in place back in 2010, the secondary schools were at the tail end of the investment, so around Band D, the exception being the second phase of investment at Cwmbran High, the 6 million that was invested when we closed Llantarnam Secondary School and merged with Fairwater. There was some proposed funding then, another 10 million, I think it was, in Band C. So it's largely condition that's driving the changes. I don't know, the extent to which you get around some of our schools, but I think if you did a tour tomorrow, you probably would arrive at the same conclusion just from a visual inspection of the sites, which ones were in most need of attention. It's undoubtable that work needs doing at St Albans. It's undoubtable that work needs doing at West Monmouth School. The buildings are old and not suitable in some cases, so need to be made as suitable as possible to allow for effective teaching and learning. It's a really difficult one because all of our schools are a priority, but we don't have the funds to be able to do all of them at once. I'm not sure I'd say that Cwmbran High has been moved further down the list. At the moment, we're saying that the immediate priority is to finish off that which we couldn't finish off in Band B, so the 2 Welsh medium primaries. Group 2 includes Cwmbran High, as it does other schools, and there is no priority order in those groupings at the moment. They're not listed in a priority order, and to some extent, they won't be until we're able to establish the funding route for them. Sometimes opportunity allows you to do some projects before others. And until we can understand the funding profile, I don't want to put them into a prioritised order. The process for getting it approved, well, clearly we're here today because we're interested in your views, and I'm sure as a consequence of this meeting, you will let us have those views, and we need to reflect on those before we then put final proposals through to Cabinet. That then needs to go to Welsh Government, and ultimately they will have a say in whether or not the plan is acceptable, although I think the reality is that it's unlikely they will say a plan is unacceptable. What they might have conversations about is the speed with which things can be delivered if their funding is also stretched. This is it's a competitive bidding process to some extent. Welsh Government doesn't have an open-ended funding source. So what we want to do is in the pot with everybody else's wishes and plans for the next 9 years. I have to say that Welsh Government have been very good over the last few years with us in making sure that we deliver what we wanted to deliver. I can't think of one example, Steve, where we've not been able to do what we wanted without Welsh Government support.
Thank you. On the report on page 9 or page 29, Cwmbran High is in Group 3. You just stated it's in Group 2, so, and there's no prioritising, so, okay, we'll take that into account.
Chair, can I come in, please?
I beg your pardon, that is an oversight on my part.
Absec and Comp obviously is in a bad way. So how far down on the list, or what banding would Absec and Comprehensive come into, please?
They're not prioritised in that list. No, so the groupings for Group 2, all of those pieces of work we need to try and fit into the investment programme. But we're not saying at this point in time that we would do St Albans ahead of West Monmouth or Aberystwyth, and St Albans, of course, is dependent upon a different funding arrangement altogether.
Thanks, John.
Any supplementary? Thank you. Councillor Thomas, question 3.
The original size of Crownbridge School was too small and resulted in the need for additional spaces at a cost of 12.3 million. Are you confident that 50 additional places will be sufficient in the long term? And confident read the data you receive from partners in terms of pupil numbers at Crownbridge?
Sorry, could you repeat the start of that question?
The original size of Crownbridge School was too small and resulted in the need for additional spaces at a cost of 12.3 million. Are you satisfied that the data you have received from partners and the expected numbers for the expected pupil numbers in Cranbridge?
The information that we used at the time is not an exact science. It's not always easy to determine the level of special need that is going to require that kind of support. So we use the best information that we've got to design the new extension. I say it's an additional, almost doubling of the original capacity, and to some extent time will tell whether or not we need additional capacity again going forward. But I have to say that we also need to look at other provisions. There are additional learning need provisions other than Cranbridge, and we need to make sure that young people who have additional needs are going to the right kind of provision. So that means that we need to make best use of our bases. We need to make best use of a review of the bases to ensure that the provision is of the right type in the right place. And we obviously need to keep under review the Cranbridge capacity to see whether or not that lasts long term.
Thank you. So just to follow on from what John was saying, this term we've started a review of both the funding of resource bases and a review of the provision within those bases. And in terms of the provision, we've commissioned Cranbridge to do that work. This week we've appointed a new head of ALN, Inclusion and Wellbeing, and when they start in the autumn, one of their first pieces of work will be to look at the long-term projections for additional learning needs across Torvine. So that would be, have we got the right types of bases in the right locations? Because they are that first supportive call in many cases before children go on to special school education. Other local authorities have started to do this work and found it a really challenging piece of work to do because it's subject to advancements in medical care, children surviving longer, it's subject to the conditions, for example, through COVID. But that work is something we've planned in for the later half of this year.
Question 4, Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Has the 8.3 million of capital receipt been retained within the education budget, or has it been passed into the general fund?
The capital receipts go into the corporate capital funding pot, and then we make sure that our priorities are passed through for eventually council decision. So the decisions on capital spend sit with council. We've been very fairly treated in terms of funding for the 21st century schools, both within the council and by Welsh Government. So I would say that we've had the funds that we needed to do what we've done to date and hope that we're in a similar position going forward.
Thank you, Carolyn. Happy with that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any supplementary on that? Okay. Councillor Jones, question 5.
Thank you, Chair. You previously mentioned about the put on hold the work to Ysgolbrynon and the Welsh medium schools. Can you possibly give us an update as when refurbishments of these schools were likely to commence?
Unfortunately, I can't give you a start date at the moment, much as I'd like to. We're working hard to try and make sure, to try and identify a funding source for those. So we will let members know as soon as that's resolved, but I haven't got an answer for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question 6 refers to 4.5. The consultation with the Roman Catholic Archdiocese has been ongoing for years, and St Albans buildings, as well as some of our other schools, is in dire need of attention. With schools outperforming their counterparts, whilst the fabric of the buildings are deteriorating around our students. Can officers explain the difference in funding a faith school and a state school and provide an update re the dialogue between the school, local authority and the Archdiocese?
Okay, so St Albans is a voluntary aided school, so it operates under different conditions to the maintained schools we've got. In that case, they're their own admissions authority, and they employ their own staff. They're not council employed, and they are responsible for the capital works within the site. So they own the site. So as Steve discussed earlier, there's a different funding mechanism for capital investment than other schools, where Welsh Government pay 85% of the costs, and the governing body or Archdiocese is responsible for the additional 15%. There have been a number of meetings that have taken place over a number of years with the school, with the local authority and Welsh Government trying to resolve this issue. It's ongoing. Last week at the WLGA meeting, Councillor Clark and I both raised with the new Cabinet Secretary for Education the issue about voluntary aided schools in general and about the 15% contribution, and where the Archdiocese in a number of areas are struggling to fund this element, and therefore this pressure for the local authorities to step in. This sits outside the guidance and legislation that sits within Welsh Government. We recognise the challenge that's there. We all want the best buildings for all learners. In that financial situation, it's really difficult. We have another meeting with the school in a couple of weeks. We've got senior officers, we have political leads there, including from Welsh Government. We also have members of the Catholic Education Service that attend. We're all trying to seek a solution that's appropriate within the legislation and that's affordable for all parties. Is there anything you want to add there, John?
We've mentioned the political, and one of my first duties as executive member was to attend St Albans with the leader, where John Cunningham, who's a member of this committee, and the head teacher walked around the site and looked at the site. The leader and myself have attended with officers on several occasions, as the director has referred to. They haven't been the easiest of meetings, but I would remind members what the director said about the responsibility for capital being on the Archdiocese. Other authorities where the Archdiocese has had issues of getting the 15% have been in the fortunate position to help out. You will see elsewhere in the paper, John mentioned earlier, the 140 million potential capital cost. We are not in a position. If you can find a money tree that I don't know about, please tell me, because we just are not in a position in terms of education. There was a potential solution a number of years ago. Sadly, that wasn't taken up for whatever reason, and you need to ask the Archdiocese that. And as John has already said, capital costs have gone up 50% since then. So the Archdiocese would have found themselves in a better position had they gone ahead with that original proposal, and they would have addressed the primary concerns. I have declared my interest as a primary Catholic school governor. I am aware of a large number of requests. I understand the school contacted parents and asked them to write in, and I have seen those emails and the content thereof. I would suggest this committee that, given that a lot of it refers to the finances, that we forward those to Catholic dioceses. They are responsible at the end of the day. Nobody is doubting the educational attainment by St Albans. I'm very proud of them being a Torfaen school and educating Torfaen and outside the authorities' children and what they do. But we are in the position we are, and whilst we will turn over every stone to help and assist the diocese, we are where we are. As Andrew said, there are ongoing meetings which both the leader and I attend, which shows, I hope shows members, the gravity that we take, as well as the director, the strategic director, and the chief executive being involved in these negotiations. on negotiations, conversations.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I think that was useful to know how the school is funded, because when members receive emails, they're not aware of how the school is funded. Any supplementary on that question? Thank you very much. Question 7 is relating to 4.8. Whilst members absolutely agree with the decision to invest in a 3 to 18 Welsh medium school provision, other authorities have the same national strategies to follow, and whilst YGG was a regional facility, other authorities have decided to build their own Welsh language provision. Are we sure that the pupil numbers and need reflects the increased provision in our area?
So the regional provision arrangement dates back quite a number of years and reflected the take-up of Welsh medium education at the time, partly as a consequence of the 2050 Welsh Government commitment to 1 million Welsh speakers, partly because of parents' interest in Welsh medium, regardless of what others might think. All areas are seeing an increase in the uptake of Welsh medium education. So they are putting their own provision in place because the numbers are such that it reaches a critical mass where they can do so. But that helps us in a large way because our numbers are growing in primary. We need more places in secondary. We've told our neighbours that as our numbers grow, we will have less places available for them. So in answer to the question, yes, we are seeing an increase. Neighbours are seeing an increase. They will increasingly manage their own supply to meet their own demand, as we will within the borough.
So can I ask a supplementary on, I understand Newport has built a Welsh school. So my question is, has the extra numbers in our surrounding authorities affected the numbers that we have planned for in our Welsh language provision?
No, it's the opposite. I mean, Newport, again, has the scale to be able to build these provisions with the expectation that they will be occupied. Because obviously one of the big issues of introducing any type of new facilities, you have to have enough learners for it to be viable, certainly in the medium to long term. You can get away to some extent with some revenue smoothing to deal with the early years where the numbers might be low, but you can't sustain that. It wouldn't be fair to the rest of the education community because ultimately the money all comes from the same pot for all of the schools. So as a consequence of what's happening in the other areas, all we're seeing is that they're better able to meet their own demand and leaves us with the capacity that we need to meet our demand.
So where does that leave us? YGG still a regional facility, or is it just catering for Torfaen?
No, we still have some learners in Gwynslew who are from out of the borough, but the number is reducing year on year. Let's say we ultimately will reach the point where it will be a Torfaen only facility simply by virtue of the fact that we need all of the spaces for our own learners.
Okay.
Just as a follow-up to that, is think about ALN provision, additional learning needs provision for Welsh medium learners. That's a challenge for us at the moment in that we don't have one within county as a specialist base. We haven't seen the need for that come forward yet, but I know there is parental pressure for us to establish that. I've been speaking as a region about how we can manage that. There are neighbouring authorities that have open provisions. There is one that's opening in September in a neighbouring authority. Currently they have no learners with a destination for that. So one of the things that we'll be looking for as an initial step is to make use of regional bases whilst we get a scale of, or a picture of the scale that's needed. But we've raised this at the WAGL meeting last week, that there's potential scope for seedling funding to set this up and have the revenue costs met, whilst there are potentially no learners to admit to them, but there may be, and then there will be a growing need as pupil numbers increase.
Councillor Thomas, question 8, please.
Are we satisfied that contracts for new and refurbished buildings are fit for purpose and there are enough contingency funds and time in place and time for redress in place? Is there a budget in place to address this as part of a programme or a cost passed on to our schools?
So the contracts are competitively tendered by our property construction group. So we're satisfied we're getting value for money from them. And there are, we believe, sufficient allowances and contingencies to complete those builds within the overall amount of funding that Welsh Government and the Council have given us. So we believe we've got sufficient allowances in those budgets. Obviously, the two in question that we've currently got on site, Maindy and Crown Bridge, we obviously came back to Cabinet and Council and Welsh Government for further funding due to the rising costs through the pandemic, etc. So now we've reset that, we believe we've got enough going forwards.
Is there a time limit on the funding?
The limit on the funding in terms of timing is for our build programme, so no. We're not forecasting any further delays to those projects, but if the worst were to happen, there was some extenuating circumstance where the project was delayed 2 months, we don't lose any of the funding. No. The trouble there is as we extend the timescale, there's always a risk of further inflation when we come to getting subcontractors doing work. So it's kind of we're self. How do I explain? We're motivated to keep it on track, because if there's any delays caused by us or the contractors, there's possibility prices will go up.
We had an issue at the visit we had this week, where it's a brand new school. We looked around it. We went down intending to look at what a fantastic facility they had, but we were highlighted with the issues that had come out of maybe 2 years of it being empty before the snagging was done, or there are certainly issues in a brand new school that we wouldn't have expected to see when we went as a committee. So we've got sewage coming through the ceiling and damp coming in and issues like that, the doors, locks are broken. So members were asking the question, is there any contingency funding left over from that build to pick up any snagging issues or any issues that may occur in further years, although there's usually a 5-year warranty. If we take COVID, the school wasn't filled for 2 years, so that was 2 years out of their warranty that they didn't have. So, thanks.
The short answer is no. When we've completed a build project, the budget is spent, but what we do have is a defect period. A defect period with the contractors. I think it's 10 years, Steve, for most defect periods now, where if there are any significant issues, we can go back. There's obviously the initial period as well, a snagging period that usually lasts about 12 months. So the council has got options. The key is to try to make sure these things don't happen in the first place. But when you're dealing with multi-million-pound investments, sometimes things need to be corrected at a later date.
Yeah, within the contract there are various types of product that are obviously put into a building, and some of them may be on a 12-month warranty, some might be on a 5-year warranty, some are warranted for 10 to 12 years, like John said. So it depends on which parts of the building or equipment we're talking about. So there's varying grades within the contract, but the first response from our property construction group is always to go back to the developer, to the constructor, and to review what the issue is. Is this a defect they should be dealing with, or do we rely on the warranties, or is it is it out of warranty? So on a case-by-case basis, it gets reviewed.
So how would the school contact whoever needs to do that case-by-case issue?
So the first point of contact is the property help desk in economy and environment within the construction team.
Okay. Thanks. So we've got question 9, which is Councillor Watkins, which is a follow-on from our question. Thank you, Jean.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. So we visited our brand new secondary school and we noted a number of things. One of the particular things was the staff were using projectors instead of the interactive whiteboards, which the pupils would have been using in their primary schools. Also, the canteen provision does not provide sufficient space to cater for all the pupils, and the capacity in the whole school is limited. And that's just a snapshot of some of the things that they showed us. So have we learnt any lessons with the programme so far? And have we consulted with staff, governors or pupils in the school, in schools that have received 21st century investment in order to strengthen our future decisions?
Absolutely. So the concept of lessons learned, we do that in all projects, but specifically in terms of the issues you've just raised, we work closely with schools on the design in the first instance. So these aren't designed remotely and then built and presented to the school. The schools are an active partner in the designs that we eventually take through to full completion. Some of the issues you've just talked about sound like management issues to me, which if a head teacher's got issues with, they can certainly speak to us about them. Some of them, canteens, for example, sounds like that might be an issue of sittings and whether or not they actually have more than one sitting. Again, management issues which they can speak to us about. Back to my first point, we have post-occupation conversations with schools to find out the immediate things that they say, well, actually, we thought that was what we wanted, but it doesn't quite work, and if we've got an opportunity to change, we will. But at that stage, you are dealing with a finished building. So there's a limit on what you can change. But if I give you an example of something quite recently, this was up at the primary phase provision at Gwynslew. I'm sure they won't mind me talking about it. They realised that the thinking that was done around the security on the doors wasn't actually working as well for them as it needs to. There was a press button to get out of the front door rather than a pass pad, and that there was a risk there that young people might leave the building when they shouldn't be. So as part of the conversations post-occupation, we're changing it. We're just going to change that process so that it actually can't pass. And those conversations take place quite often straight after occupation, and we capture most of them.
So I think the projectors you're referring to, they appear to be a normal projector, but the interactivity is from the projector. So I think that perhaps the primary schools they were coming from, it would have been an older type of interactive whiteboard, or if you've probably seen a smart board, it's got panels down the side, etc. And it's a normal projector projecting onto that, and the two tie up that way. It's kind of been reversed in that school. The interactivity is in the projector, and they've just got local sensors on the board, so you can use let's say a bog standard whiteboard, but it's still interactive. So that's the system the school chose. They could have had LED screen interactive TVs if they wanted, but at the time the senior leadership team decided they wanted the interactive projector type. So there is still interactivity, and you can calibrate the board and use fingers and pens on it, etc.
I'd have to say, from the conversations we had in the school, I'm not sure that they're aware of that because they're not using it like that. So that may be a conversation that needs to have. But I do know that the head there now was told that the dining hall space was to cater for 3 sit-ins, which they can't afford to do. They can't afford to fund staff to monitor 3 sit-ins. So financially, they have to have 1 sit-in, and it's not big enough, so they're having to use other space as well.
But it is a management issue to some extent, and the design was agreed with the school at the time. It's very difficult to reintroduce more space in that area or equivalent space elsewhere. So I think that is a management issue that needs to be worked through.
I think it's an issue certainly in Cumberland High where the new restaurant or the canteen was done as well, because that doesn't cater for the numbers of sittings that need to happen. The canteen is relatively small. The original plans for Cumberland High was to have another upper room, if I remember rightly. I was there involved. But I'm particularly interested in Councillor Cowles' question now, if Councillor Cowles would like to ask that question.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sticking with paragraph 5.1, what role will staff, but also governors and pupils have in the design phase of any new buildings or renovations in order to make sure it fits each school's bespoke needs?
Yeah, that's basically as John explained, that throughout the design process with the architect, obviously the architect brings knowledge of design in many other schools and having consulted with various other councils and school leaders. So we involve them through the whole design process from start to finish. As soon as we let the contract, which are generally design and build, we set up a design team, and they're a key part of it.
To talk to pupils as well?
Yeah.
I'm keen to hear the young person's voice. And,
yeah, so young person's voice, it comes in two ways. It's kind of led by the head teacher to an extent. If they want to involve like a committee of pupils in the design, giving us ideas, they can do that. Or they may do that independently and then bring those ideas to the meetings.
Just an additional bit on that. There's a concept called community benefits within the contracts that we establish with contractors. So they also do work with neighbouring schools. I was talking to the head teacher from Crownbridge the other day, who said that the contractor there had been doing work with other schools in the area as part of what they're doing at Crownbridge. So there's engagement with young people at that level as well.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins, question 11.
Thank you. Still on 5.1, applications for school places are outnumbering the surplus places in some schools. Are we confident that there is sufficient capacity in our schools for the next 10 years?
Yeah, yes, it's to some extent it is difficult to project 10 years away. Some of the children haven't been born yet, but we are tracking every year live birth data. Obviously, we've got all the children in our primary schools which we're projecting into the secondary school, so that's a bit easier. But we've done a few studies, and every year we are reviewing it, and we think we have sufficient capacity for at least the next 10 years. The only area of pressure, as John said earlier and Andrew alluded to, is that we need to grow the Welsh medium places. So we are confident we've got sufficient capacity within our current plans. The other influence will be, as John said, the RLDP when that comes forward. So we're prepared for those discussions as and when they confirm the size of sites and number of houses. So we review it annually.
Thank you. Question 12, Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is regarding 6.1 Bulletin 2, which is whether developer contributions from housing growth sites can be used to fund Welsh medium provision requirements, or whether Welsh Government will fully fund their policy aspirations. Have you received any indications regarding this?
In terms of the revised local development plan, we need to wait to see which sites come forward, where they are, and if they are of a size that they will need their own primary provisions. That's the point at which we would have discussions about the nature of that school. And I'm not saying that they would definitely be Welsh medium, or they would be faith, or they would be a mainstream English medium school. But that's the point that we have the conversation. In terms of Welsh Government, they fully funded the extension, the primary phase up at Gwynthlyw. I'm not sure that those sorts of opportunities are going to come further down the line, but I think the point I'd want to get across is that we are constantly looking around to see what money is available. The most recent example where we tried to attract additional funding was on the net zero area of interest. That's obviously a burgeoning area policy-wise and practice. And we tried to bid into some funding for a school on that. It wasn't successful, but we'll keep going. If those opportunities arise, we just have to try anything that can increase the coffers.
Jane? Some of these questions answered, but if you want to continue to ask it.
Thank you. Carrying on with 6.1 and 6.2. How closely do officers in education and planning work together, particularly with regards to the revised local development plan and the demand for school places?
I'd describe it as we're a critical partner in the discussions. They need to look across the council at all of the different demands that might be caused by new housing or new businesses, new industry. So they rely on us to provide the education perspective, and we're regularly in conversation with them. We're in conversation with them, obviously, since the reset of the revised local development plan. All of the work that was done prior to that still holds some value, but as time goes on, it needs to be refreshed. So we're still in the conversation. I anticipate we will be right up to the point that that plan is finalised and beyond. You'll be aware of the proposed development around the Mylid, which was part of the last plan. It's got planning permission. There's a school part of that, which the contractor will pay for. And obviously we get involved in that as well, because we need to make sure that they build the right school, because ultimately we will take that school on. So I don't envisage the conversations will ever end with the planners. It's just a cycle that we keep going.
And if I can just add, every year they give us a copy of their 5-year plan of known housing coming on stream, so we incorporate that into our forecast every year.
Question 14, Councillor Jones.
Thanks, Chair. My question relates to 6.2 and regards surplus places in Torfaen. In order to address the surplus places, the report refers to the option of making use of existing buildings as a community resource to also alternative closures. Do we have any current examples where it's necessary in Torfaen? And if so, does this provide a financial income? Excuse me.
Because of the tough decisions that were taken in Band A, and the fact that that got surplus places under control, we're not expecting surplus places. We're really not, unless there's a mass exodus of the population. The likelihood is that we will increase on the basis of new housing. So it becomes a bit academic to some extent, but I can tell you that when we closed Victoria Primary School, that building then became a centre for mist. So as an example of where a building was reused for a good purpose. Most sites that we didn't need were sold, but the purpose of that was to get the funding, the capital receipts, to be able to invest in the rest of the programme.
Thanks. Thanks, Chief. Thank you. That completes our questions on the report. We're going on to Appendix 1 now, and question 15 is Vicky Horler, please.
So, with regard to Appendix 1, you note that the possibility of converting a current English medium school to Welsh medium. Have any mergers been considered, primary or secondary? And would this only be considered once the overall affordability of the whole programme has been considered?
What we're signalling with that comment is that we're not taking any options off the table. It's too early to take options off the table. We haven't got any proposals to convert a school to a different language. There are different ways you can go about it. If you did decide you were going to, there's an approach that you can do it over a number of years. But at the moment, all we're saying is we know that we need more places. We don't want to fix on one particular solution. Logically, if we are going to have to build new schools in the south as a result of additional housing, that would probably be where we'd initially look. But we just want to keep the options there.
Thank you. And just to follow on, what is the rationale behind that statement about additional Welsh medium being grouped in prioritising Group 2 ahead of Group 3 priorities?
It's an issue of timing. So with the growth targets that we've established as a council within the Welsh Education Strategic Plan, with the numbers projected that Steve's talked about, we know that when we get to the end of this decade, we're reaching the point where we will need to add more provision, and that's likely to be in that second grouping. We can't be precise about the timings of these groups. That was my initial point, really, but it feels right that it's going to be about that point. We know that Group 1 are things that we should have already done. So the only logic is that we don't want to deal with the things that we need first, and then the second list is going to be the things that we think we should be dealing with second.
Thank you.
Okay, question 16 there as well. Do you, Victoria, or do you want to? Yeah. Thank you. Question 17 is Councillor Jones.
Has the relocation of a new pupil refill unit been considered yet? Is it likely to be central in order to limit the amount of travelling undertaken by pupils?
No, it hasn't. But location will be considered. I mean, the borough is 12 miles long, 2 miles wide, and the vast majority of learners that attend the PRU, I believe, at the moment are probably transported. Population is largely in the south, but that doesn't mean to say that the demand for the PRU is necessarily largely in the south. It doesn't follow that it's down to the population size. All I would say is that we recognise that we need to look at this. We think that we need to certainly make provision for primary PRU, and at the time that we do put the proposal together, we will have to look very closely at where it goes.
Thank you, Janet. We are 12 miles long and 3 miles, but we've got a few hills in between as well. I remember walking to school. There we go. That completes the questions of Appendix 1. We're going on to Appendix 2 now. Councillor Watkins, page 3.
Thank you. Would Torfaen Leisure Trust be expected to contribute towards any investments in the leisure facilities at Cwmbran High School? And are they able to assist with funding that's not available to Torfaen Council in order to assist with the funding?
I think I'd have to answer that's outside of my purview. I'm not sure what the trust obligations are to the council. They are responsible for the provision at Cwmbran High. They operate it jointly with the school because the school uses it in the daytime. But in terms of renewal, my gut feeling is that would be down to the trust, but I really couldn't comment beyond that.
I could, but I won't. There we go. Question 19 is Councillor Coles.
Thank you very much, Chair. Towards the bottom of page 30, Appendix 2, it says there's a comment about Aberystwyth School and that numbers on roll are going to increase when the Mamilid development starts, and members were quite surprised about that, given that Westmont is closer to that development. So will Aberystwyth be the catchment school, or will it be Westmont with catchment areas being amended for both schools?
This is a function of parental choice, historical parental choice. So we deliberately didn't change the capacity in the north of either school because we were aware that Mamilid was coming along. Because of that, there was, Westmont is a busy school now. It's filled up quite a lot over recent years, but that's largely because there's still parental choice. What will happen when the Mamilid proposal comes on stream, if it comes on stream, is their catchment school would be Westmont. Those people who are out of catchment for Westmont, who traditionally would have been able to get into Westmont because there was capacity, any new young people probably would not have that choice. The same as in the south of the borough, where we've reduced surplus capacities, and that ability to pick and choose between schools is less than it once was as a function of taking out the surplus.
Question 20 on page 30, Vicky Holder. Thank you.
Please could you expand on the update that you provided regarding St Albans School? When reading the report, members felt that the update should include more detail regarding the work that could be required and the current risks of the school building.
to some extent, it's not within our control. So the original proposal that the Archdiocese asked us to work on, that Councillor Clark mentioned earlier, was a 3 to 16 school that would have addressed issues in the primary, particularly around St David's, Our Lady of the Angels and St Albans. The Archdiocese wasn't able to continue with that, so latterly they've come forward with a proposal that they would like to see happen for St Albans. It doesn't reference the primary schools at all, it would just be a secondary solution. The discussions are ongoing about that, as Andrew mentioned before, largely around affordability and about what is possible on site, because you've got some listed parts of the site. You've got the playground at the bottom, which is on a floodplain. You've got land adjacent to the school, which is the park, which would probably be needed for the development period. You may need to site temporary accommodation, but at the moment, all we've got is an aspiration that the school and the Archdiocese have brought to the council, and we're trying to work through, well, how does that aspiration get funded? Because we haven't worked those things through, we can't really say much more. At the moment, it isn't a going concern. It's not a proposal that we can take forward. We need to wait till we've got some affordability issues resolved. Yeah, so just, I don't know if this is a supplementary question that further down, but one of the issues that the school, I think it was actually the Catholic Education Service and the school mentioned at our last meeting with them, was could we use the value of the St Albans site to generate funds? And the reality is you can't, because in order to generate funds, you'd need to sell that site. You can't generate it without you can't make it usable unless that site's not going to be used for the purpose that they want. So, but we needed to confirm that with Welsh Government. We also wanted to confirm with Welsh Government whether they would treat the value of the land in their contribution. So they contribute 85% typically to these schemes. That's what it says in the Act. But we were interested, as well as everybody else that was around the table, in whether or not Welsh Government would actually say, well, you've got a piece of value, a land there with a value of, a notional sum of, say, 2 million or whatever. That's not necessarily accurate, but if that was added to the figures, would that increase the money that Welsh Government would give? And they've said no. So we just keep trying these things. We've got to try every avenue, and we'll do so.
We also have to take account of the trust for Pontypool Park as well, don't we? So is the St Albans School in the ownership of the diocese?
I've asked that question, and the answer I got was that it is. The bit that would need to be researched and a satisfactory answer found for is whether or not there are any covenants. Yeah. So we know about the listing, and listing is relatively easy to deal with in the sense that you can see it and you know what the limits are going to be. In some cases, if for example, a voluntary aided school ceased to exist on a site that we owned, for the time that it's with the school, it's vested in the school. The minute it ceases to be a place of education, it reverts back to the council. If any of you were around when St Peter's was being discussed in council, and Tim, the solicitor, was trying to explain it, it's massively complicated. But we would need assurances, written assurances, I think, and probably some guarantees around ongoing right to use that site for the purpose that was intended and in the way it was intended.
Question 21 is on page 31, and could you explain the issues linked to Westmont School listed building status and the financial impact that this will have.
The issues really, there's a number of different bits to the building. Some of them are heavily listed, some of them are not. Believe it or not, bits of the fencing is listed, and when replacement was required, we had to make sure, and the school had to make sure, particularly because they were funding, I think, had to make sure it met the requirements. There's complexities around what you can do. You obviously have to have close contact with the listed buildings officers to make sure that you're not doing anything you shouldn't do, that you preserve everything that you should do, that you use particular materials, that you use particular methods. One of the consequences of that, I have to say, is that you can see costs be significantly higher than it would be for a non-listed building. And that's something that we just need to factor in when we start the work.
Thank you. Question 22, Councillor Jones.
Actually, you've more or less answered this question. If Welsh medium primary schools admission numbers increase as hoped, are we confident as an authority that YGG secondary provision has sufficient capacity?
Short answer is yes. So the current capacity calculation says we're there or thereabouts for the West target of 205 year one places. There, as you can understand, when the school is, I think they're slightly under capacity at the moment in terms of the number of pupils going there, so the number on roll is not at capacity, so they've varied use of a couple of classrooms, so they've introduced some other spaces. So we believe that obviously as we need those places back, we can just reorganise the school.
That's good to know.
Councillor Cowles, question 23.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to page 33 regarding the West Mon cluster, it says there is sufficient capacity across the cluster with a current surplus of 16%, rising to 26% by 2025 upon the opening of the new Mamilad school. Can you please explain the reason for such an increase in surplus places and at what percentage is surplus deemed an issue, particularly by Welsh Government? Thank you. Put my mic back on. Regarding the West Mon cluster, sufficient capacity across the cluster with a current surplus of 16%, rising to 26% by 2025 upon the opening of the new Mamilad school. So the question is, what's the reason for such an increase in surplus places, and at what percentage is surplus deemed an issue, particularly by Welsh Government?
If I come in first, the simple answer for the big increases will be new schools. So that as part of the Mamilad development, the developer is required to provide a primary school, and that changes the capacity in the cluster. It's artificial to some extent. The school will start to fill up, and that capacity will come back down again. So as the houses increase in number, the number of young people increases, the capacity gets used up. In terms of at what point does capacity become an issue? Back in the early days of the national programme, Welsh Government were quite adamant that if you got to 10-15% or beyond, certainly 15%, then you've got issues. You're spending money on empty seats, which is why we tackled our surplus issues in Band A. It's still about that. That's roughly where we pitch it. We can go below. We can temporarily go above. But anything that goes below or above is something that gets monitored on a year-on-year basis to make sure that we're keeping the capacity at about the right level. Steve, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
The only thing I would add is it's obviously about with the large developments, once we can't build half the school. So we've got minimum thresholds, so we need a one-form entry classroom. We've also, on the Mylid sites, there is space allocated if we need to extend that school were the whole development to increase in future. So we could change it from a 1 form entry to a 1.5 form entry school at a later date.
Thanks for that. So our final question, you'll be pleased, and it's a general question, it's from Councillor Thomas.
Chair. In light of the school lockdown required in West Wales last week, will the security and safeguarding be reviewed for new and existing school buildings, and who will recover any related costs?
Thankfully, we haven't had an incident like that, but you're right. There could be something. There was a review done last year of our sites to identify potential vulnerabilities. That was done largely at the time as a result of a few inspection results which talked about issues that may need attention, partly due to the fact we just needed to assure ourselves about where potential issues were on sites. And a little bit later in the year, as thinking around Martin's Law came into play, Martin's Law being the Anti-Terrorism Act, which talks about what sort of things you might need to do. Now, Martin's Law, to some extent, is moving away a little bit because schools, all schools, primary and secondary, will be in the lower requirement band, which is largely around management arrangements rather than physical. But we're cited on where there are issues. Most of it is perimeter fencing, and those issues where they've been identified have been put onto the annual maintenance programme list. But the name perhaps is a bit misleading because that doesn't mean that it'll be done within a year. It's about it's a risk-based approach. We with colleagues in property services look at all of the things that need to be done to keep our schools open and safe. The budget for maintenance around schools was inflated over the last couple of years, largely as a result of additional money coming through from Welsh Government, but this year is back down to a level of around £400,000, I think it is. We work down the priority list and until we get the money spent, and it may be a number of years before some of those issues get addressed. But critically, the schools have emergency management plans. As part of the management plans, they understand their own schools' settings, their vulnerabilities. And actually, when you're talking about the sort of event last week, it's the ability to keep people in the school and safe rather than the perimeter. Now, it's a dynamic environment. You can never entirely engineer out all issues. Schools are not prisons. They're designed for people to go in out and come out of. But we're trying to work through as best as we can with new schools. Yes, I think we work with the planners. The planners are aware of the requirements that particularly come around the police expectations. So it's secure by design, I think, is still involved in our conversations, Steve. In new builds. In new builds, yeah. So for new ones, we're taking account of the latest standards and requirements.
So just as a follow-up, so in 2 weeks' time, Torvine's actually hosting a regional directors meeting. As part of that, we're having a regional review of lockdown procedures and how we all respond to it, because we think it's timely. In terms of claiming back costs, no, there's no pathway for us to do that at the moment. Another aspect of just keeping a monitor on it, we have that monitor, plus also Estin will always look at this aspect during an inspection. And if they've got any concerns about site safety, they would always contact us with a wellbeing letter. So we've had some link to site security, internal security doors, and whether they're strong enough. In previous local authorities talked about whether actually there's paint flaking. They look at all aspects of site security and risk to learners. So it's under active review.
Are schools given help with any cost related to that?
The annual maintenance budget talked about is a council budget, so it's an allocation that the council makes to upkeep its premises, which includes schools. It's not a huge amount of money, but yes, that's not something that schools, that is something that's done for schools. Yeah. But ordinarily, no. Most maintenance issues for the school, you've got a fence around the school, for example, and it needs maintenance as opposed to replacement. Under the delegation, it would be a school's responsibility to deal with that. There's a scheme of delegation that sets out what schools are responsible for and what the local authority is responsible for. Is when you start to talk about significant and new works normally that it transfers in responsibility across to the local authority. It's another one of those areas where we do the best with the money that's available, and I'm sure schools do as well, the money that they get in their budgets for property work.
I've got a supplementary on that, please. How often do, you mentioned Estlin picking things up. Estlin only in perhaps every 5 years or something, so issues can happen before that. How often do our officers check health and safety, and is it the responsibility to report health and safety on an officer check from the local authority? I remember some years ago, health and safety was handed over to governor's responsibility, and sometimes they're not experienced enough to see the need in our buildings and our school sites. So where are we with that?
So this is another annual process. Schools are required to produce a health and safety plan. As you say, the responsibility, because the governing body is the employer, sits with the governing body, and schools should have a health and safety governor. It's come up just in this last few days, actually, a question about the training for those governors, and it is a requirement that they are trained. So we don't give people a role, or schools don't allocate a role within a governing bodies, and there's no support. There is support there. So that's one angle. They're supposed to do an annual walk around, at least an annual walk around with the head teacher. The head teacher plays a very important role in the senior leaderships in schools, so they are in the sites day in, day out, and they've got responsibilities about spotting and reporting and dealing with issues. Some of them they have to deal with themselves because that's the delegation in place. Some come to the authority. In terms of property services staff, the piece of work last week was a specific piece of work, but the team down in property services are on school sites all of the time. And as part of the process for developing the annual maintenance budget, they review their intelligence and in some cases go out and collect more intelligence about each individual site. And that builds into a picture that then informs the spend for the following years and beyond.
For the last 6 months, we've also been working with a task group, so some head teacher representatives with our property maintenance team. So we're agendering and tabling issues on a sort of monthly basis. So we're meeting with them and reviewing this type of issue.
I was just thinking, if I was a health and safety, and I've done health and safety with trade union and everything, but if I was a health, I wouldn't know anything about the subsidence in the leisure centre in Cumbrawn School. Whereas I might see that there's a wall cracked or a fencing that needs replacement. But, it's the expertise that is needed, isn't it? And a lot of this, particularly listed buildings of our schools and the Faith School with all that brings. Whether or not that training is sufficient for a health and safety governor is a thought. Thank you.
Perhaps I just finish on that there is access to the sort of experience and skills that they need if they don't feel able to do it themselves. So probably one of the most important roles for a health and safety governor is, if in doubt, ask, because they're not expected to be experts. They are people who volunteered for these roles. What they need to know is that a body of people in the council who've got the expertise and are more than willing to help and do help on a regular basis.
I think my point was about identifying it in the first place. If they don't see it, they can't report it, can they? So, yeah. Jane.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick supplementary. You said that most issues that schools face are around their perimeter fencing. What other security issues do they face?
The two main ones are either perimeter fencing or the doors in and out of the buildings. Andrew mentioned a case there where young people are very adept at getting out of buildings sometimes, and you've got to work quite cleverly to try and make sure that they can't. An example we've got that we've been dealing with is maglocks. I don't know if you're familiar with maglocks. They're doors that basically, when the magnetic force is in place, they can't open, but when that's broken, they can. Often used on external doors. They've got breaking force of about 180 kilograms at the lowest level, which is a lot. But a young person in one of our schools has found a way of breaking that connection. So they're always aware of those things. Height of release buttons for doors is an issue that's come up over the years, and we've had to work with schools to move or change the types of releases I talked about in Grinsley and the primary phase education, where we're changing the type of access so that it's fob rather than press button. But I would say they're the main two. Keeping people out of the site, keeping people in the site, people keeping out of the building, in the building.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Councillor Clark, do you have anything to add, or any of the other officers, that something that we might have missed during our scrutiny? No? That leaves me to thank the executive member and officers for their time and contributions today then, and ask them if they'd like to leave the meeting, and we'll formulate our recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Members, can I please remind you that the meeting is still in formal proceedings and still being webcast while we wait for our officers to retire. Thank you. Thank you very much. May I remind members what's been asked of the Scrutiny Committee to consider when coming up with their recommendations. Members have been asked to assess the progress of the 21st Century Schools programme, determine whether the priorities for investment going forward are appropriate, and offer recommendations to the executive member on the development of a prioritised plan for ongoing investment in Torfaen school assets beyond 2024. So do members have any specific recommendations that they would like to make on the report?
Okay.
Councillor Joe.
When we mentioned about the PRU, they said they hadn't found a location as yet. I think that should be a priority. Even though we said it's 12 miles long and 3 miles wide, we have to have a central location suitable for all pupils and transport providers. Yeah. And my second was, they say there's no ALN provision for Welsh medium. I think we should prioritise that as well. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Yeah. Can I suggest that we perhaps have a report in the autumn on the ALN provision and future priorities and spending on it, please?
Do you have any recommendations?
Liam's pressed his button. Do you want to go?
Yeah, sorry. Getting there first. I just thought, on the question I asked about the role that staff, governors and pupils have in the defined phase of new buildings, that's clearly not working, is it? Because they sort of answered like the school get really involved in that phase, but then there's still issues in Crossy about the capacity for the dining hall. There's issues that you mentioned, Chair, about from Ranhai, but I'm not sure how to word that recommendation.
Yeah, ultimately, the comment was that it was the head teacher's decision of how much pupil involvement and pupil voice, so maybe that's something that we need to consider.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Can I just come just picking up on that, if it helps, on the visit, members did ask their current head teacher across a bit. She's only been in post for the last 2 years,
right.
and I think the senior leadership team itself is fairly new.
Yeah.
So when they talk about dealing with, in terms of the design phase, I think it was a different set of people.
Different set, right.
So perhaps what they saw priorities and things have changed. And but I picked up on the point as well about the pupil voice, where they said it was sort of the head is up to the head. So maybe you as a committee you want to encourage that all schools request pupil input.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We said that we could think that should not offer the development as initial stages. As you said, unfortunately, in Crossy Cynnog, leadership's changed since then. But I think it's something that all schools and officers should, initial development.
Can I just say I was present when the 21st century schools were consulted in Cumbrian High School, and there was at no time was the young people consulted. I think the head and me as chair of governors had an invite to the project board, but that soon ceased, and they continued to develop without any thought going. However, the head teacher at the time was asked for where the plugs need to go, or where they want certain whiteboards fixed and things. So, there is a need for consultation with staff that live in the building and students that use the building. So I think that would be a recommendation. Yeah, okay. I picked up the AIM provision and the review for the bases as well. So that was picked up. The point about forwarding the emails that we received to the Archdiocese, did we pick that one up? Yeah.
Yeah, just gonna say on that one. Obviously, because the emails were sent in to us, we can't forward them on. But what we could do is provide an overview of the points raised within. A summary of the points.
To be fair, they were all more or less saying exactly the same thing, weren't they? So I don't think it would be too difficult to pick out the key points and pass them on.
A recommendation that an email is sent, probably from the executive members, stating that we've received a number of emails from parents. Okay.
Vicky and I have just noticed, regarding my question 5, no funding source. When we asked for an update on the refurbishment work necessary at Scrutiny and Cymraeg, I think we need to have an update on that, because those schools are deteriorating rapidly. Because I've been to Brynol and it's really poor standard.
Sorry, Mrs. Perhaps asking if we can have some visits to the schools.
Yeah, we did. We said we'd like a visit, didn't we?
I think the recommendations, we've got our visioning session, but the recommendations out of this should be that we visit all our schools in turn, if we can manage, working down the borough or up the borough, whatever. But absolutely, we'll have a recommendation that we visit all our schools. I think I got the one about the question 2 where they moved down the order, and it was in group 3 in the report for Cumbrian High, but John stated that it should have been in group 2, so we make sure. I think if we're looking at the 2 schools that didn't get looked at in Band B, we need also to have Band C in place before any other recommendations, and priorities need to be looked at over the last 10 years of producing the report as well. Obviously, there's some of our schools are in more dire need, and I'm looking at, there's 10 million promised for Cumbrian High in Band C, and now in the report it says 38 million is needed. So, we need to have an assessment of what our finances are going to be. Okay. I can't. Did we pick up anything else, Caroline?
Could we have one? I don't know if we can, but could we have one about the contingency process? Yeah. Because obviously, in our experience of going to Crossy, it wasn't working for them, and it seems very restrictive. The contingency process seems very short and very restrictive, and in reality, it isn't working. So I think we need some kind of recommendation around that.
To put a recommendation to explore all options around that, is it?
Yeah.
So is that too loose a recommendation? If we ask them to explore all options, can they easily come back and say, yes, we've explored all options and the one we're doing is the best one? Would they then have to justify why they're doing that one? I think otherwise, just what I'm saying, they could do that. They could go, yes, we've now explored them all. Do you know, okay, well that's, maybe it wants to be slightly tighter than that.
Yeah. We asked the question whether or not there was any contingency, and they said no, there wasn't, but there needs to be, because of the likelihood of another COVID or a bill that's going up that, you know, it doesn't cover the warranty or what have you, like the doors in Crossy School at the moment. You know, we need to recommend that before we pay the final payment for any development, I would have thought if you were a householder, you wouldn't have the final payment until you've completed the, yeah. So I think we could recommend that we look into our procurement and contingency funding, I think. So, yeah.
When we asked about the warranties, we just looked at each other and we thought, well, it should be 10 years, should be ballpark across anything. I mean, when I was working on a different environment, National House Builders was a 10-year right across the board. Should that not be incorporated into our schools?
Yeah. The head teacher did mention that the 5-year warranty at Crossy had run out. So, you know, it is something, because it was mentioned 10 years today. So perhaps that's...
And then he said in different phases could be 5 years. So we were wondering, the recommendation is 5 years straight across the board with the developers.
I think what might be difficult with that, because I think some of the points they're making related to like tech stuff as well. So obviously, you know, like the tech used for like security doors for the whiteboards, all these sort of issues that cropped up. You know, you're unlikely to. I assume you're unlikely to have a 10-year on that sort of
buildings, like if it's a roof leaking and...
We've asked the question several times this morning on surplus places and whether or not we're planning for the right amount of spaces. In thinking of the numbers of parents outside in appeals today, and the comments made by the head teacher at Crossy School, they can't take all their catchment at the moment. So I think we need to have a recommendation to ensure that we've got, I know it's a guessing game most of the time, but, you know, where are we with, you know, ensuring that we've got enough? Otherwise, we'll be here again with Crown Bridge next year or the year after, looking for extra funding when we've planned the next phase of the school building programme. So.
Can I just bring in, I don't know if we have noted it as a recommendation, that we have some feedback on the conversations regarding St Albans School. I don't know if we have noted it, because there is an ongoing conversation, but we do need to be kept in the loop of how that is progressing or not progressing.
Yeah.
We could actually ask the executive member to speak with the counterpart in Welsh Government. The Education Secretary is now the Torfaen AM, and to, you know, to actually perhaps, you know, G that up with the conversation of, you know, this is in dire need, and we, you know, we need to urge you to sort out the funding.
So although I know that they said that 15% of the funding is on the diocese, but 85% is still Welsh Government, and that is a part of our reflections here.
So, can we just recap of the recommendations we've got there, Geraint, just so we're aware of what we are?
Yeah, I'll just briefly go over. Obviously, got the issue around the location through, prioritising the ALM provision in Welsh medium, and a review of the bases as well. Ensuring pupil voice and staff voice in the design phase of new and refurbished school buildings.
I think governors are included because it goes to governors and then they decide.
I can put it
Or the head, I might rely on the head teacher taking the governors, but it usually goes to governors.
Asking the executive member to forward on a summary of the key points raised by the pupils and staff of St Albans.
Was that it?
Right. No,
Yeah,
it is a case of that. No, need an update on the two schools that were delayed, and attached to that, member said that he wanted to visit all schools to assess the condition of them. The change, making sure that Cumbrian High School should be in Group 2 as opposed to 3. The issues around the contingencies in place, looking at the procurement and the contingency funding, the surplus places to ensure that we have got enough places, and feedback regarding the conversations that take place with St Albans School, and asking the exec member to speak to counterpart in Welsh Government.
On the contingency, did we put that?
Yeah, that was the one before that.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Could we have some kind of recommendation on getting more information on how we work with Torfaen Leisure Trust? Because it sort of sounds like they are responsible for the leisure centre facilities, but equally nothing's being done there. So it is a building thing, and obviously they must have some involvement in it. So could we have some kind of recommendation so that we can understand what our relationship is with them, or who is responsible for these things, how it works?
Yeah, I think there's a need for reviewing the service level agreement between the trust, the council and the school. So perhaps John didn't know anything about it, but it is the school's responsibility. It's the school's sports facilities during the day, and it is handed over to the leisure trust to rent out and whatever on any school holidays or after school from 3:30 onwards, I believe it is. But there was a service level agreement drawn up with Dave Congreve and the school and the Leisure Trust when the Leisure Trust came into being. So that, but I don't think the head teacher is aware of this service level agreement or anybody, and John certainly didn't seem to be aware of it. So I think that's a recommendation that we need to chase up the service level agreements anyway, really, if we've got any service level agreements with our schools. So. Okay, I think that...
got the reports on the future ALM provision. Got that down, great.
Meeting, I think, so that concludes our recommendations. Agenda item 6 is the date of the next meeting, which will be the 10th of July. A long time yet, isn't it? There we go. Thank you very much for your attendance, and as chair of this committee, thank the officers and members for their contribution. I now close the meeting. Thank you.